Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. What's that, you ask? Oh, you want to know what characterizes a quality teaching and learning program in the middle years? Fantastic question. Let's find out together. And when I say find out together, what I mean is I'm going to give you the 5 key elements that I've found for creating a successful middle years learning program. If you're wondering why I know so much about teaching middle years, well, I don't mean to brag, but I've now spent over 3 weeks in a classroom working as a pre-service teacher, so I'm pretty sure I'm qualified. Look, they gave me a badge. Plus, I did make a middle years program and have it analysed by my peers and mentors, so I do have a little bit of feedback, which is actually legitimate. I did actually teach that program during my 3-week placement, and I have received some really good feedback from my peers and mentors. So combining that with the literature and research, I've come up with these 5 steps and hopefully they're helpful for you. Step 1, create a safe and supportive learning environment. This can be a challenge in the middle years classroom because let's face it, teenagers have a multitude of changing and complex factors that they're contending with. Not only are they tired, hungry, horny, and hairy, they're also navigating changes in friendships and crossing the bridge between being the babies of the school and the seniors. Vygotsky and his followers have suggested a holistic model of adolescent development that integrates in a meaningful way the major characteristics of adolescents' cognition, personality, social behaviour, and sexual maturation. Humans are complex creatures, and the nuances of each individual personality are often amplified during the transitional period that is the middle years, sometimes resulting in a disengagement from education and disruptions in the classroom. So how do we engage these middle years students? How do we re-engage them? Sullivan, a senior lecturer in education at the University of South Australia, emphasises the importance of classroom conditions that promote academic engagement and encourages teachers to think of their classroom as an ecosystem involving interactions between the physical environment, teacher characteristics, curriculum, teaching methods, resources, and a multitude of student variables.
We can set up a safe and supportive learning environment by establishing rules and expectations.
Rules should be negotiated and encourage ownership. The term expectations might be more effective than rules. By designing learning experiences that require an active engagement, cooperative learning, discovery learning, experiments, role plays, manipulation of resources, and rotating activities, students become more accountable because they feel responsible for monitoring their own behaviour. Positive relationships with students can impact behaviour, so learning the names of students quickly, getting to know their interests, being fair but firm or authoritative, actively listening and responding sincerely, and giving students roles and responsibilities that facilitate the everyday functioning of the class are all behaviour management strategies. Creating a safe and supportive learning environment was a really crucial element in my teaching placement, and I can't emphasise enough how much the middle years students really genuinely appreciated it. When they returned their exit slips or notes for me at the end of a Zoom class, there was an overwhelming theme of gratitude. I established a safe and supportive learning environment by collectively helping the students to decide on a small set of guidelines for engagement and feedback via Zoom. So we were doing oral presentations, and I just got them to, before we even began, I got them as a class to decide on expectations and to decide on the kind of feedback that they'd like to get and the kind of feedback they'd like to give. We watched some videos about constructive feedback and what makes good feedback, what makes bad feedback, and then we decided what we wanted to do, and then we worked from there. Another way that I provided a safe and supportive learning environment was by demonstrating that mistakes are totally fine. I make them all the time, and I made them all the time. It was my first teaching placement, and it was via Zoom, so I had very little idea what I was actually doing. And whilst I tried to maintain a positive and whilst I tried to maintain a professional aura, I also let the students know that I was new to this and that if I made a mistake, I wanted them to pick me up on it. This collaborative back and forth really created a safe and supportive learning environment. I want them to know it's okay to fail. I want them to try, and if they fail, acknowledge it, correct it, and move forward. So I got some really good feedback from my mentor teacher and also from my students. But my mentor teacher, and this really stuck with me, she told me that After I slipped up and acknowledged it, after that lesson, that students who had remained quiet previously were really starting to come out of their shell because they weren't afraid of making mistakes anymore. They were not afraid of making mistakes anymore. I think humour is really key here. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself so that your students can learn to laugh at themselves. And you've got to let them laugh at you too sometimes. Number 2, use applied learning strategies whenever possible. Whenever possible. So using applied learning, and in particular constructive learning approaches, is really useful. This was pointed out by one of my peers who reviewed my recent curriculum plan. She said that allowing for personal narratives to be explored can increase engagement for students and increase their depth of knowledge. Social transmission and self-reflecting actually underpin applied learning, so sharing our stories within classroom space creates greater cognitive thinking for students, and it also gives them a voice in the classroom. On applied learning, old mate Rick Churchill says that students do not just learn about their world through formal education. A range of informal and non-formal learning spaces shape the engagement of children and young people. Can you hear that dog? That is why we need to take learning outside of the classroom, both in theory and in practice, allowing students to contextualise their knowledge in real and meaningful ways. Applied learning in English and literature can be really tricky, which is why, for my curriculum plan, I decided to opt for a debate on a real-world issue, the Black Lives Matter movement. That way students were able to engage with something that was really going on outside in the real world in a social context. So I got some really positive feedback from my peers about this. They liked that students were able to engage with things that were really going on around them. Before we move on to number 3, I'm going to encourage you to take a break. That is something that I failed to do in my Zoom sessions with my students, and that was feedback that I got. So, break time. Welcome back from our very short break that was certainly not 2 full days. Okay, on to number 3. Let them work together on things that they actually collectively care about. This is very important. Teenagers are social creatures, and they actually learn socially. They construct meaning by engaging with each other. Just ask Vygotsky and his mate Karpov. Hi, I'm Karpov. Adolescents have new needs and desires, and so interactions with peers become a priority in navigating values. Seems legit. In my curriculum program, I pointed out that McLean and Dowden, 2011, provided research that middle year students are motivated to make a difference in social contexts. Barry Plant responded to the idea that inquiry-based learning provides a unique and motivating opportunity for learners by remarking, "Good point." Thanks, Barry. It is a good point, which takes me to my next good point, number 4. Find out what they do know as well as what they don't know and start somewhere in between. I'm going to use a bit of applied learning to show you what I mean. Here's what your students don't know. If you start here, they're going to feel overwhelmed. It's too much. They don't have the building blocks. Here's what your students already know. It's full. You can't put any more knowledge in there. This is what you should be doing. Teaching. This space is the zone of proximal development. In my research, I identified what Piaget called disequilibrium and Vygotskians called a problem situation. That is, giving adolescent students an issue to resolve when a solution is not immediately obvious actually motivates them to learn. Barry Plant commented that he agrees with this sentiment, saying that it is a very effective approach as long as you use activities that provide just the right-sized gap. On to our 5th and final element now, number 5, reflective practices. Reflective teachers are those who are aware of the teaching decisions that they make and of the consequences of those decisions. I tend to favour reflection on the moral, ethical and political and social factors of teaching, rather than the technical aspects of teaching. According to Colleen, this means that I take a liberatory view. Liberatory view of teaching. This kind of critical reflection gives me the opportunity to assess power dynamics and to question the assumptions about practices that seem to make our lives easier but actually end up working against us in the long term. Reflecting again on the specific program that I designed for teaching the middle year student and the feedback that I received, using Varley's framework for reflection, I asked, what is being emphasized in this program and why is this happening? How will this influence how I teach? I concluded that there is a heavy emphasis in the program on social justice, particularly as it pertains to issues of race and class. This was an intentional decision to contextualize student learning, and due to the success of the unit, it will influence my teaching by reminding me to keep learning relevant and keep it within a social context. When I reflect on the program, I see that applied learning elements lack in the voices that should have been elevated. So a stronger community engagement could really help lift the program and students' experiences. Reflecting on these things, acknowledging them, means that I have the power to change them in the future, which will improve my teaching and proves the value of reflective teaching practices. Welcome back from another very short break. Okay, so based on peer feedback, literature, and mentor feedback, here are some examples of improvements that I could make and strategies that I can use to improve future programs and practices as a teacher. One of the things I really need to work on is measuring success. I need to work on ways to show evidence of what students understand. In the feedback provided on my curriculum plan, Barry Plant suggested rubrics as a good way to assess and measure the outcomes of students' achievements. This is something I would absolutely work in, as well as giving students access to those rubrics before the assessment so that they're really clear on how they can do well, so that they understand the criteria for success before they begin. Structures and processes to support tasks like group work can be used to scaffold activities. For example, an informal team building game as a class and with teacher support before asking students to go off and work in groups would set expectations and guidelines on how to function as a member of a group of diverse learners. Based on the feedback from my previous assignment, weaving a safe and supportive learning environment plan into each lesson would give it greater clarity and specificity to ensure maximum safety. It was also brought to my attention that greater differentiation could improve the outcomes for individual students, and this is something I agree wholeheartedly with and intend to do more research on. Something else that was suggested by one of my peers was more cross-curricular integration. Rather than focusing a unit around English, she suggested that I create a unit that centres around a general capability, like personal and social capability. General capabilities are aspects that are critical across all subject areas of the curriculum: literacy, numeracy, ICT, critical, creative, interpersonal, intercultural, and ethical thinking, plus personal and social capabilities. Ultimately, continuing to engage in reflective practices during and after my lessons will ensure that my future teaching practices and programs continue to evolve in a way that will best support my middle year students to reach their full potential. So let's do a little recap on my recipe for successfully producing a teaching and quality learning program for middle year students. 1. Create a safe and supportive learning environment. 2. Use applied learning strategies whenever possible. 3. Encourage collaboration on issues they care about. 4. Work within the zone of proximal development. 5. Engage in reflective practices. Thanks for joining me. Oh, and I did see you there. You might want to put something over that camera.